From dramatic changes in looks to complete gimmick changes, these are the biggest transformations in WWE history, starting with none other than Rhea Ripley. When Rhea first arrived in the WWE in 2017, she had long blonde hair and looked like any other hopeful trying to make a name for herself. She was talented and athletic, but there was nothing about her appearance that made her stand out. She quickly ditched the blonde look to avoid comparisons to fellow Australian Toni Storm, and by the time she reached NXT UK, she'd found something darker. The gothic attire, the shaved sides, the fearless attitude. Fans started calling her the Nightmare, and she backed it up by winning both the NXT UK Women's Championship and the NXT Women's Championship. But even with all that momentum, Ripley's main roster run started slow. She bounced around without a clear direction, teamed with Liv Morgan, and briefly went back to blonde hair as she searched for an identity that clicked with Raw and SmackDown audiences. But then, in 2022, everything changed. Ripley turned on Liv Morgan and joined the Judgment Day stable built by Edge and Damian Priest. It was there that the character that would define her career was born. Overnight, Rhea Ripley became Mommy. The transformation went far beyond a nickname. She leaned all the way into a darker and unapologetically confident heel persona. She stopped trying to fit the mold of what a women's wrestler was supposed to look like and instead leaned into exactly what made her different: her size, her intensity, her intimidation factor. Ripley won the 2023 Women's Royal Rumble as the very first entrant. She captured the SmackDown Women's Championship and held it for 380 days. And Rhea Ripley went from a blonde rookie to the most dominant female star in modern WWE. But if leaning into her authentic self is what launched Rhea Ripley to the top, the next member of Judgment Day proved that sometimes to reach to the next level of your career, you have to turn on your own family. For most of his time in WWE, Dominic Mysterio was just Rey's kid. He debuted as a baby-faced sidekick, tagging alongside his legendary father and getting the kind of polite, lukewarm reaction reserved for someone riding a famous last name. He was somewhat athletic and decent in the ring, but there was no edge to him, no personality that separated him from being anything more than an extension of his dad's legacy act. For years, that's all Dominic was ever going to be. But then came Clash at the Castle in 2022. In one of the most shocking swerves in recent wrestling history, Dominic turned on Rey and on Edge, aligning himself with the Judgment Day. It was the kind of heel turn that instantly reframed everything about him. Dominic leaned into the heel persona as an entitled, smug brat who threw tantrums, ran his mouth, and then hid behind his mommy Rhea Ripley the second things got difficult. What made Dirty Dom's character work was the commitment. Dominic wasn't just a heel on TV, he'd keep up his feud with Rey even away from the ring. He'd talk a big game, get absolutely obliterated, and then cry about it afterward, all while mommy bailed him out. Crowds turned on him with the kind of heat usually reserved for wrestlers twice his experience. Every arena chanted insults at him. He became must-see television specifically because people wanted to see him get his comeuppance. Dominic picked up his first singles championship, the NXT North American title, before becoming a fixture in Judgment Day storylines on the main roster, feuding across the roster with everyone from Rey himself to Braun Breaker. Every women's wrestler from Liv Morgan to Roxanne Perez has been dragged into some kind of romantic angle with him. Dominic Mysterio went from a wrestler nobody cared about to arguably the most effective heel in the entire company. But switching gears from these modern transformations, let's rewind the clock 2 decades back when a failed dentist would transform into one of the scariest characters in WWE history. Before Kane was tearing doors off Hell in a Cell and terrifying an entire generation of wrestling fans, Glenn Jacobs was Dr. Isaac Yankem, an evil dentist hired by Jerry Lawler to take out Bret Hart. Yankem debuted in the summer of 1995, and the gimmick of a heel dentist was exactly as ridiculous as it sounds. He wrestled Bret Hart repeatedly through 1995 and into 1996, but the character never got over, and it fizzled out by late 1996. Instead of cutting Jacobs loose, WWE tried again almost immediately and somehow made things worse. When Kevin Nash and Scott Hall left for WCW, Vince brought in fake replacements as a jab at his former stars, and Jacobs was given the job of playing a fake Diesel. Teamed with a fake Razor Ramon, the whole storyline was widely mocked, dropped almost as quickly as it started, and left Jacobs' career hanging by a thread. 2 gimmicks in, and both had been failures. It looked like Glenn Jacobs might simply be a big man who Vince couldn't figure out how to use. But then, in October 1997, everything changed. WWE repackaged Jacobs as Kane, the masked half-brother of The Undertaker, finally coming to collect his revenge. Kane debuted at Bad Blood, tearing the door off the very first Hell in a Cell encounter and costing Undertaker the match against Shawn Michaels. It was an instant hit with the fans. Kane didn't talk. He didn't feel pain. He was booked as an unstoppable force with a real emotional backstory. From there, Kane became one of the most well-known characters in wrestling history. He won his first WWF championship against Stone Cold Steve Austin at King of the Ring 1998 and went on to become a multi-time world champion. He competed on pay-per-views for over 2 decades, terrified kids across the world with his mask, and became a lock for the Hall of Fame. Glenn Jacobs went from a forgettable evil dentist to one of the most legendary big men the business has ever produced. But while finding the right character changed Kane's career, this next wrestler's transformation changed the entire history of WWE. In 1996, Steve Austin was drowning under one of the most boring gimmicks of all time. He debuted as the Ringmaster, presented as some kind of technically sound heel with slicked hair and a plain look. Austin already had years of experience under his belt from WCW and ECW, where he'd shown flashes of the sharp-tongued, no-nonsense wrestler he could be, but WWE had buried all of that under a gimmick that gave him absolutely nothing to work with. Fans didn't hate him, they just didn't care. By 1996, Austin had enough. He shaved his head, dropped the Ringmaster name, and reintroduced himself as Stone Cold Steve Austin, a blunt, foul-mouthed brawler who didn't respect authority, didn't follow rules, and didn't pretend to be a hero. The real breakthrough came at King of the Ring 1996 when Austin defeated Jake Roberts in the tournament finals and cut the infamous Austin 3:16 promo. It was raw, aggressive, and completely unscripted in tone compared to anything WWE was putting out at the time, and it turned into the biggest merchandise slogan the company had ever seen almost overnight. From there, the character only got sharper. Stone Cold wasn't a hero in the traditional sense. He drank beer, flipped off his boss, and beat people up because he felt like it. But that was exactly what made him the most popular wrestler alive. His feud with Mr. McMahon became the defining storyline of the Attitude Era, with Austin positioned as the ultimate blue-collar rebel sticking it to a corrupt corporate boss. The results were staggering. Austin became a 6-time WWE champion, headlined 3 WrestleManias against The Rock, and is widely credited with helping WWE win the Monday Night Wars. The Mr. McMahon feud alone is still considered by many to be the single greatest program in wrestling history, drawing rating numbers WWE has never come close to touching since. Steve Austin went from an anonymous jobber to the biggest needle mover the industry has ever produced, all because WWE finally let him be exactly as blunt and real as he actually was. But if you think Austin reinventing himself with a shaved head was dramatic, this next wrestler changed his entire nationality just to finally get people to take him seriously. For years, Ludwig Kaiser was one of the most skilled wrestlers on the roster who still couldn't quite break through as a single star. Wrestling under his real name, Marcel Barthel, in NXT UK, and later as Gunther's right-hand man in the dominant Imperium stable, Kaiser was a phenomenal in-ring worker from the European independent scene. But inside WWE, he was almost always positioned as the guy standing next to somebody else. He was talented, but stuck in the shadow of bigger characters. Then, in one of the strangest storylines WWE has run in years, Kaiser found new life under a mask that wasn't originally even his. In March 2025, WWE introduced El Grande Americano, a comedic parody of a luchador played by Chad Gable, feuding with Rey Mysterio and Dragon Lee. When Gable went down with a shoulder injury that summer, most fans assumed the character would simply be shelved. Instead, WWE handed the mask to Kaiser. And almost immediately, something clicked that hadn't clicked with Gable. Where Gable had played the character as a parody, Kaiser played El Grande Americano as a performer who actually respected the lucha style rather than mocking it. He began cutting promos about the tradition of masks and lineage in lucha libre and embraced the Mexican culture wholeheartedly. The transformation was so complete that El Grande Americano became a national sensation in Mexico overnight. From there, the character exploded. Kaiser began appearing regularly in AAA, won the promotion's prestigious Rey de Reyes tournament, and upon Gable's return, Kaiser defeated him in a historic mask versus mask match. El Grande Americano became one of the most bizarre, most successful crossover angles in modern wrestling. Ludwig Kaiser went from a wrestler once known as the guy standing next to Gunther to the biggest hero Mexico has seen in years. Sometimes the biggest transformation doesn't come from becoming more yourself. It comes from disappearing completely into someone else. But speaking of wrestlers who had to completely rebuild themselves from the ground up, nobody did it more literally than The Chosen One. In 2009, Vince McMahon stood in the ring and personally told the world that Drew McIntyre was destined to be a future world champion. That kind of spotlight would be a lot for any young wrestler to carry, and Drew wasn't ready for it. He won the Intercontinental Championship early, but the push stalled out almost immediately. And by 2011, he was thrown into the three-man band with Heath Slater and Jinder Mahal, a comedy jobber stable whose entire purpose was losing matches and getting laughed at. By 2014, WWE had no idea what to do with him anymore and released him outright. Most wrestlers never recover from a fall that steep. But Drew did something different. He went to the independent scene and completely rebuilt himself, physically, mentally, and in the ring. He wrestled all over the world in promotions like ICW, WCPW, and TNA, put on some of the best matches of his career, and proved that WWE had never actually let him show what he was capable of. He got bigger and more powerful, grew out a thick beard, and transformed his presence entirely. By the time WWE brought him back in 2017, the smiling prospect who'd been called the Chosen One was gone. In his place stood the Scottish Warrior. The new version of Drew McIntyre was ruthless and intimidating. He aligned with Dolph Ziggler, captured the Raw Tag Team Championships, then went out on his own and tore through the roster as one of the most credible threats on the show. The pressure that had crushed him a decade earlier now seemed to fuel him instead. His crowning moment came at WrestleMania 36 when Drew defeated Brock Lesnar to win the WWE Championship, finally fulfilling the prophecy McMahon had made over a decade earlier. Since then, Drew has remained a fixture of WWE's main event scene, feuding with names like CM Punk, Seth Rollins, and Cody Rhodes, and captured multiple championships along the way. Drew McIntyre went from a failed experiment to a battle-tested main eventer who built himself back up from zero. It's one of the most complete physical and psychological transformations the business has ever seen. But if Drew's story is about proving people wrong, this next wrestler developed a completely new persona and became the biggest star on the planet. When Dwayne Johnson debuted in 1996 as Rocky, WWE thought they'd found their next clean-cut babyface. He was the son of Rocky Johnson, grandson of the High Chief, and he had $1 million smile. Vince pushed him hard right out of the gate, handing him the Intercontinental Championship just months into his career. But the push backfired immediately. Fans saw through the corporate polish and rejected him outright. By early 1997, it looked like Dwayne Johnson's wrestling career might be over before it ever really started. But then he joined the Nation of Domination, found a new attitude, and everything changed. The smiling babyface Rocky died, and The Rock was born in his place. Gone were the clean-cut smiles, replaced by sunglasses, tailored suits, and a cocky, condescending attitude that treated the entire audience like they were beneath him. What made it work wasn't just the new look. It was that Johnson finally got to be funny, sharp, and genuinely himself on the microphone, instead of reciting a scripted good guy character. His promos and catchphrases took over pop culture, and crowds that had booed him a year earlier couldn't get enough of him. The Rock quickly became one of the cornerstones of the Attitude Era, feuding with Stone Cold Steve Austin, Triple H, and Mankind in matches that helped define the most successful period in WWE history. He captured the WWF Championship for the first time in 1998 and went on to become one of the most decorated champions of the era. From there, his story transcended wrestling itself. The Rock transitioned into Hollywood, eventually becoming one of the highest-paid movie stars on the planet, all while periodically returning to WWE for blockbuster matches against names like John Cena and CM Punk. Dwayne Johnson went from a rejected babyface to arguably the single biggest crossover star professional wrestling has ever produced. And while doing so, he built a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio with lavish mansions and private baseball fields in his home. And if you want an in-depth look into the most expensive houses of WWE wrestlers, check out this video next.